I got up there and just kind of told the story of my dad and our relationship, but also I kind of spoke to the guy who shot my dad. I knew that he wasn't in the room, knew that he might not even see it, but it was almost like I was setting myself up to, this is the life that you're gonna live, and it might not be true forever, but it's gonna be true today, and we're gonna keep taking steps to make that true in the days to come. And now getting to work there like my dad did, it's just so special to me to know the life that he lived. I knew him as a dad. It's just been cool to be a part of other officers' lives now and get the behind the scenes. And I know it's just so hard to be in that field anyways, and so to introduce this topic of how do you even forgive, how do you even move forward with something like this, like you have permission to do that. I was just spending some time praying, talking to God, and I just remember him bringing just this image to my mind of looking him in the eyes and just seeing his suffering eyes as he hung on the cross for us. I don't deserve that. And so Jaime doesn't deserve that. But because of God and his graciousness, we get that. And so it would not be fair of me to accept that for my own being, but not understand that for Jaime's.
You're listening to the ATO Bridging the Divide podcast, brought to you by the Assist the Officer Foundation.
Since 1999, the ATO has given assistance to the first responder community, and now we want to give them a platform to hear their incredible stories.
We also want to hear the stories of the many people that support us.
Our community is small, but it is strong.
We have differences. We don't always agree, and we all make mistakes.
But together we can grow, we can heal,
and we can learn from those mistakes.
and together we can bridge the divide.
Welcome back, ATO supporters. I'm Joe King with Kent Wolverton, and we are honored to welcome back on the great Chris Webb to tell today's story of true inspiration. On December 3rd, 2021, Richard Houston went to work that day in Mesquite, Texas, to serve that community. He put that uniform on for over 2 decades in Mesquite. Houston received nearly 50 commendations, 2 life-saving bars, and a commendation bar. However, Richard did not return home that day to his wife and kids. He gave the ultimate sacrifice as he was gunned down on a domestic call. This podcast believes that their legacies should be kept alive by their stories. Today we are sitting with one of Richard's legacies. The country watched his oldest daughter boldly give his eulogy, and we were in awe. I watched it myself and could not begin to understand this young adult's strength and resolve that she was able to speak and say farewell to her superhero. What is the true definition of strength? The quality or state of being strong, capacity for exertion or endurance, the power to resist force, toughness, power of resisting attack. Today's guest embodies this definition and is truly an example of the beautiful side of the human race. Beautiful in her deliberate approach to exhibit such incredible grace and Christ-like love towards her father's killer. From standing and speaking to a packed church saying farewell to her father, to giving the impact statement at his murderer's trial. This young woman is a role model for all ages. She now dedicates her life to spreading the message of love and forgiveness. Today, the ATO stage is giving to the very inspiring Shelby Houston. To Stand with Shelby today, we have a very special guest co-host. This woman is also an inspiration to all. She has truly dedicated her life to service. She helped develop domestic violence diversion program for Tarrant County. She spent 13 years as an ADA in Grayson and Tarrant County. In 2013, she was appointed as criminal magistrate judge to preside over the 10 misdemeanor and 11 felony courts. In 2015, in collaboration with MHMR of Tarrant County, she created the Enhanced Mental Health Program. She currently presides over this weekly docket, supervising over 100 defendants with chronic mental health issues. The Honorable Judge Rainey Webb. Shelby, Rainey, Chris, thank y'all so much for joining us here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I want to get into, we got a lot to unpack here, but Shelby, I want you to tell the listener a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I am a college student at Dallas Baptist University, studying psychology and working part-time at the Mesquite Police Department as a records clerk. I serve at my church in women's ministry, so I'm just kind of all over the place at this time of my life. So,
okay, when did you start working at Mesquite PD?
So I started working at Mesquite, I would say this past summer. So around June, I've been there for almost 6 months now.
Oh, wow. Rainey, your husband, I'm not sure if did you listen to his episode? It's an older one, yeah. It's one of I think it's our second most downloaded somehow.
I made her listen.
I think he deletes it and downloads it over and over throughout the day. Every day. His numbers up.
He's made himself viral.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I get a lot of, I've gotten several messages about his episode. Can you also tell the listener a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Chris and I have been married for 21 years. We have two 17-year-old twins, a boy and a girl. I am a magistrate judge in Tarrant County, so I work for the elected criminal judges in Tarrant County, and before that, I worked as an assistant district attorney in Tarrant County as well.
Chris reached out to me months ago about an idea for this podcast, and anybody that listens knows that I cast a wide net with guests and topics, and I think that's important because I don't want to get locked into being a SWAT show or a narcotic show or just a war story podcast, because there's plenty of those out. We've got them in droves here in Dallas PD. We've got several more we're going to tell, but also this podcast is designed to inspire people in different ways. And I think this story that, you and Chris had an idea for, I think that's we're going to hit on. We're going to this is a different type of episode for us, different type of guest. And even you, Rainey, this is all kind of uncharted territory with us, but this is an important message, and I think the ATO listeners are going to really appreciate it and really be inspired. So that being said, I want to talk about an incident with Shelby from December last year. Could you tell the listener a little bit about that?
Yeah, so on December 3rd, 2021, I was at Dallas Baptist University. I had some activities going on that day. I was doing some homework, running around, and I got this text from one of my pastors. He's like another dad to me. He just kind of texted me and was like, "Are you at home or are you at DBU?" And he had just ignored all my texts before that, and so I was really confused. I told him I was at DBU, and he didn't answer me, so I kind of continued on with my day. And I had gone to do some shopping, and my mom ended up texting me the same question about 2-3 hours later. So I knew something was up, just because you don't have two people that you're really close to text the same thing. And so she asked me when I was coming home. I had planned to come home that weekend. It was on a Friday. And so I told her, I was like, I'm not planning on coming home until tomorrow. I was like, what's going on? And she was like, well, your grandparents are coming home, and we really would like to see you. And so it was just a kind of odd, positive tone in her voice. You could tell she was trying to hide something. And so she said, I didn't believe her. And so I got to my car and I called her and I said, what's going on? I need you to tell me. And she still tried to fight it, but at the end of it, she was like, I just have a priority and I need you to get back to campus. And so this was right around rush hour, and so I'm trying to get home as fast as I can. I'm already like 45 minutes away from campus. And so I start driving home, and I'm sitting in all kinds of traffic, and the weather was getting bad, and so I just remember I felt like everyone was tapping on their brakes. Like, it's like everyone knew but me. And I remember checking her location, and I saw that she had gone to the hospital earlier, but it showed my dad wasn't there. And so I kind of ruled that out, that anything was going on with our family at least. And so I just remember crying the whole way home, though, because I was just so confused. I had no idea what was going on. And so finally I pulled up to campus, and I called her and called her and called her, and I had no idea, but she wasn't picking up. And I was like, what in the world? You're going to make me drive all this way, and then you're not going to answer the phone? Well, meanwhile, she was telling my brother and my sister the news. And so finally she called me, and she said, your dad's been in an accident today. And unfortunately, I've heard that before with him being in the law enforcement. And so I just figured, maybe a car accident. I was like, okay, well, where is he? And that's whenever she said, he's not here anymore. And I remember the exact parking spot I was sitting in. I remember what time of day it was, the weather outside, what I was wearing. I just lost it in the car. But it wasn't like a cry. It was like screaming just at the top of my lungs. And I hung up the phone on her, and she tried to call me back and had somehow gotten across to me that my pastor and his wife were on their way to get me. And so I got out of the car, I walked up the stairs into my apartment, threw some clothes into a bag, and then they got me. And I remember it was so rainy that day, and it took me like an hour and a half to get home. And so it was hours since my dad had passed that I had even made it home. And so I remember they pulled up to my house, and before they even stopped the car, I just flung the door open, and I started running out to meet my mom. She met me in the yard, and I fell just because I was so weak. And so she carried me inside, and I just remember coming in the door, standing there, and just asking, like, where is he? Where is he? Where is he? And just I collapsed on the floor, and our counselor thankfully was there, and then my pastor and his family stayed. And so it was odd. We all found ourselves sitting on the front porch for most of the night just to get some air, but we were laughing and smiling, and it was just an odd feeling. You knew that's not how you really felt, but it's like just so in shock, like. Yeah. And
the laughter covers the uncomfortableness.
Oh,
right?
yeah, for sure. And so, yeah, we stayed out there for most of the night. I didn't sleep that night or anything. And then a few days later, we started preparing for my dad's funeral. That happened on December 9th. And I just kind of felt tug at my heart to speak at my dad's funeral. And so I did. I helped my mom get all the things coordinated, and then I sat down the night before and just wrote whatever I could. I did not spend time on it. And so whenever I got up there, a lot of people know me by that eulogy. But it's so funny because it's not me up there. It's totally Jesus. And no words that were said were my own. And so, yeah, and after that, it just kind of started becoming really public for us, which I know my dad's probably has the biggest head up there right now because of it. But yeah, that's a shortened version of what happened.
So being the daughter or a child or a spouse or sibling, friend of a first responder, that call could always come in.
Oh yeah,
right?
Yeah, for sure.
And your father, he had a 21 years on
Yes.
Mesquite
Yes.
at that time. What was your father? Who's your superhero?
Oh yeah, for sure.
What did he mean to you?
He was just my best friend. I was a daddy's girl growing up, and we would go hunting and fishing, and I would usually come home to him watching some old Western movie whenever we got home. It was never quiet in the house. He had just the worst dance moves and never stopped.
We can relate to that.
Oh, yeah. I think they all do. But, yeah, he was just my best friend. He was someone I could count on to just give such wisdom. And he had gone through a lot, just not only being in the law enforcement, but he lost his dad whenever he was in high school. Mm-hmm. And so he was familiar with that feeling. And he was all in just about everything that he did. And so, you know, he always pushed me to be the best I could be. He was there at every volleyball game, every school event. There was nothing that he would miss. He would turn his schedule into deep nights so he could see us during the day. I mean, he just did anything it took to be the best dad.
Well, I said in the intro, which you haven't heard because I was sneaky and recorded before you walked in, that I believe that telling these people's stories and keeping their legacy alive is through this message, right? This platform to keep these stories of their legacies alive, and you're one of his legacies sitting here, so we're actually sitting with.
Thank you.
When y'all got the. You mentioned sitting there on the porch and masking the pain with the laughter and smiles. How was your siblings and your mother? How were they?
My mom was completely struck by shock. Probably, I'd say, for an entire week. She was completely normal. I remember it was odd just waking up and seeing her because it was almost like I was looking for her to cry. Like, I was looking for her to feel it. Not because I wanted her to be in pain, but of course I wanted her to feel like she had a safe space to do that. Mm-hmm. And so my brother and my sister, they were all very different in the way that we've processed all of this. My brother leans a lot towards anger. My sister, she kind of bottles it up. She's always been very private. And so there was probably a lot of tears shed that we just don't know about. Mm. But I think it's just been super important for us and really valuable for us to still do that together. So we talk about him all the time, and we bring up funny stories and we laugh, not because we're faking it, but because it really not only helps us, but we help each other when we do that. So,
yeah, talking about the positive stories and the happy times.
Yeah, for sure.
It helps you overcome. So I watched the funeral service too, and I could not believe your strength. You getting up there. I couldn't have done that. You said that you loosely wrote out some words the night before, and can you just describe the listener? You got up there, you said Jesus spoke through you.
Yes. Can
you describe that, and where do those words come from? I mean, they're from Jesus, but I just can't see how you got through that. Where did you get the strength to get through that?
So I have always been a very driven person. If I was going to do something, I was going to do it. And it's funny because a lot of the officers had asked my mom that morning, like, do you think she's going to make it through? Do you think she's going to get up there and actually do it? And we all just kind of knew. I was like, yeah, I'm going to do it. And I kind of already had a passion for speaking and writing, and so that was not something that I was worried about. I knew at the end of the day I was going to go up there and probably forget everything that I did and said. And so I got up there and just kind of told the story of my dad and our relationship, but also I kind of spoke to the guy who shot my dad. I knew that he wasn't in the room, knew that he might not even see it, but it was almost like I was setting myself up to, this is the life that you're going to live, and it might not be true forever, but it's going to be true today, and we're going to keep taking steps to make that true in the days to come. And so I knew right away I wanted to speak to this guy, and so I just addressed him in my eulogy and just kind of told the gospel in a way that is very real. I think sometimes we think it's just this one-time thing. You know about it, but you don't really live by it. But I knew that that's not what we were called to do. I knew that we were supposed to make that a reality in our relationships with people. And so I just knew really early on that I wanted to forgive this guy. A lot of people probably didn't believe that I could forgive him that soon on. I still, have conversations with people. They're like, did you really mean that? And I completely meant it, and I still do to this day. And so, yeah, I went up there, and there was no nerves. I was completely calm, and I know looking back that it was supernatural. Mm-hmm. It was not on my own doing. Mm-hmm. And just with the response afterwards, getting to have conversations with people and people going back to church or people coming to know Jesus just through the story of my dad and how we've used this, it's just been such a testament to the Lord's faithfulness and nothing to do with us. So,
yeah, the word forgiveness. I mean, it's an easy word to throw around, and as believers, you think you think you can do something, and you think you would react a certain way. You were put in a position to really truly be tested, and you followed through, and you're still following through with that. And I think it's an amazing example of what. Of living out what you truly believe. And, I'm 50 years old, and I don't know that I could, I proclaim that I'm a believer and I'm a Christian, but if put in the same position, I don't know if I have the strength. I've not been put in the same situation that you were put in, so I don't know how I'd react. So the fact that you, as a 18-year-old, how old were you last year? How old were you?
I was 18.
At 18,
yes.
At 18, were strong enough to stand there and not just there, but also when you did your victim impact statement, and we talk about that too in the courtroom, actually facing him. Right. It's the maturity level, and I'm not just talking about age maturity. I'm talking about in your spiritual maturity that you actually you were challenged and you met that challenge. It's so very impressive to me.
Thank you.
And it's what stood out, and it's why I said, Joe, you've got to meet this girl, and you've got to get her in here.
Well, that was for me, and I don't know if I've even told you this story. A friend of mine that works at the Dallas DA's office, I think I might have told you, but she was at the funeral. Oh, and, yes. Yeah. And she called me from the parking lot, and she said, you will never believe what I just witnessed. No. She said, there is this young, beautiful daughter of this officer who stood up, shared Jesus with the entire audience, and then forgave the person who shot him. And I immediately called Chris, and Chris found the video from Channel 5. And I think every family member of law enforcement officers, you anticipate that call. Right. And I don't know if y'all ever had that conversation in your family.
Oh, yeah. Multiple times.
Because we have had it. I mean, when our children were younger and Chris was on the SWAT team, he'd get called out in the middle of the night, and they would always ask me, is Dad going to be okay? And because, we are the ones who have shared our faith with them, and they have come to faith in Jesus, I knew that I couldn't tell them yes.
Right.
Because
right,
I didn't know the answer.
Right.
And so they would say, is Dad going to be okay? And my answer was always like, I don't know, but I know that God will take care of us.
Yes.
Because he always has, and
Yeah.
he's been faithful. And what I saw in you was what I had played in my head a million times,
Yeah.
is if we were ever in that position, would I have the strength to use that opportunity to share Jesus with others?
Right.
And everything that you said and the way that you carried yourself was beyond what, I could have imagined. It was such an example to me of this is the truth. This is, we have all considered, what could happen, and for you to live that out is phenomenal.
Thank you.
Well, after the services, there's in the police world, in just life, whenever there's a traumatic incident, there's a critical incident or a death in the family, you're getting inundated with supporters initially.
Oh, yeah.
And then after a while, it dies down, and then you have to rebuild and pick up, and then you start taking on. You have a lot more time to think on it and stew on it, and start the rebuild process. After the services, the holidays are always tough when you have a loss, and
for sure.
it's then you have anniversaries come up, and they don't get any better. How did that rebuild look for your family, and being the oldest child? Did you feel that it was important for you to step up and help that your family grow and heal?
Yeah. I knew with my dad just being the leader of our house, he was a devoted Christ follower, and so I knew, I have a responsibility now, and it's not one that was placed on me, and I wish it wasn't. I am happy to take on that role, and it's not necessarily like it's expected of me, but it's important, I think, because there's been so many days that, one of us doesn't really feel like it's worth it, and it's important for us to have people around us that encourage us to keep going. And honestly, after the services, there was just an immense amount of support, and we had no idea that my dad even knew that many people, touched as many lives as he did. And anyways, it was just so cool to see people really rally around us. Like my church, Community Life Church, immediate needs, they just met them, and they showed up, they sat with us, they cried with us. And then just the police department in itself, we've grown so close with them. And now getting to work there like my dad did, it's just so special to me to know the life that he lived. I knew him as a dad, and there were a few times that we would see him at work, but never like in action, And so it's just been cool to be a part of other officers' lives now and get the behind the scenes. And I know it's just so hard to be in that field anyways. And so to introduce this topic of how do you even forgive, how do you even move forward with something like this? Like, you have permission to do that. And so that was super important for us, not only for them to encourage us, but for us to encourage them as well.
Well, I think we officers will generally try to, once you've been in it for a while, you try to shield your family from the reality of of what we do. So we don't want y'all to know what we see. Right? We don't want our kids or our families to actually see what actually happens.
Right.
So there's a lot of shielding, and so the bonds that you make with your coworkers are some of the strongest bonds you have, yet you almost want to keep them at arm's length from the family because we don't want y'all to see that.
Yeah.
And you said again about the forgiveness part, you just brought that up again. For what we do as first responders, it because of the repetitiveness of seeing the evil things that happen in the world constantly over and over, and we categorize good guy, bad guy. you become very crusted, and forgiveness seems like a very distant idea, right? Because most of the time the evils you see aren't on us. It's been done to somebody else, for the most part. But even then, it's forgiveness is not the top of the priority. It's like, why would you? It's so easy. You're an evil person. You did this thing. You don't deserve anything.
Right.
As a police officer, you get in that rut, and so rehumanizing people by forgiveness.
Right.
It's what you said earlier. It's not about forgiving for me or for them. I'm not forgiving. It's actually freeing as a person that forgives.
Right.
And how did that feel? What did that feel like to you when you actually said it and you heard it come out?
Right.
How did that make you feel? Was there a release?
Yeah. There was definitely just weight lifted off my shoulders. I knew that Jaime was going to be a part of my life, whether I liked it or not. And it was up to me to either carry on this guilt, or not this guilt, but like this unforgiveness, this bitterness that I could live with forever. And I think people would be like, yeah,
totally get
it.
Right. Almost expect you to.
Right. Yeah. But I knew that was only going to leave me even more hurt, even more broken, even more confused. And at the end of the day, I just remember it was a few days before the funeral. I was sitting outside on the porch after I just woke up, and I was just spending some time praying, talking to God, and I just remember him bringing just this image to my mind of like looking him in the eyes and just seeing his suffering eyes as he hung on the cross for us. And, I don't deserve that. And so Jaime doesn't deserve that. But because of God and his graciousness, we get that. And so it would not be fair of me to accept that for my own being, but not understand that for Jaime's. And so I knew really early on, like, I had to make that decision. And whether it felt good or not was not my priority, but I knew it was what Jesus was calling me to do. And sometimes we have to do hard things that we're uncomfortable with. But ultimately, it's not about us. It's about Jesus. It's always been about Jesus. And so to bring honor and glory to him by forgiving Jaime, like, that was the plan from the very beginning. And it's take Jaime out of it, take us out of December 3rd. Like, that's how we should operate in our everyday relationships. And so I completely understand being in that field and having to rehumanize these people. However, I think, which I'm guilty of it too, just almost creating like this atmosphere of, they don't deserve it. They did this wrong. They're evil. But at the end of the day, it's like, how much more do we deserve that?
Yeah.
And so, anyways, I just knew God had been really kind to me. And so I needed to spur that on,
I think there's a hard time for people to understand forgiveness too, in the idea of also not having consequences.
Right.
And I remember, I've struggled, working in the DA's office and seeing really terrible things happen to people, especially kids. And I remember talking to a friend who's from Rwanda, and his parents were murdered in a genocide in 1994, and he'd written this whole book about forgiveness. And I said, I was like, how do you forgive?
Right.
And he's like, forgiveness is on our part. It has nothing to do with that other person.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean there aren't consequences for that.
Right.
It means you let that go because that's what Christ did for us.
Right.
And even, there's example after example where Jesus was interacting with people and he forgave them, but there was still a consequence,
Right.
So I think that's hard for people to comprehend too, is that when you say you forgive, that's just the act that you do.
Right.
There may be other things that happen that you have no control
Right.
over, but this was what you had control over, and that was the decision you made.
Right.
And then consequently, when you look at Jaime's kids, just thinking about what their path could have been like, you will have a relationship with them,
Right, yeah.
and you've met them already.
Yes,
and what was that
yeah.
interaction like?
It was awesome. It went so well. I got to sit down with them and just take December 3rd off the table. I just kind of told them, I'm here to talk about whatever you want to talk about. But I want to get to know you guys, and I don't define you by what your dad did. But you have a life, you have a purpose, and it's not tied to anything that happened on this day. And so I just kind of brought up just some basic questions like, where do you go to school? What do you want to do? Do you have, how's your siblings? What do you like to spend time doing? But also I kind of had an idea that they hadn't talked about anything that happened on December 3rd. And so, I made it very clear at the beginning. I was like, we don't have to talk about any of that if y'all don't want to. And they just kind of said, no, Shelby, we'll talk about whatever you want. And so I just kind of opened the door to allow them to say whatever they wanted. And it was interesting to see like them start talking about it and them look at each other and be like, oh, I didn't even know you were there. Like, I didn't even know that happened. And it's like so obvious they have never talked about this. And which I think just comes back around to the whole point of like, it is so important to talk about the hard things and to take care of yourself. I know like in law enforcement, it's your job. And so you don't feel like it has any relation to like you going home and interacting with your kids or with your wife or your husband or your family. But the things that law enforcement sees is the worst of the worst. And so even with our department in Mesquite, we have just made it so clear to these guys, like you have to talk about it. You have to get in counseling. You have to get help. And I think we're starting to move away from this, this idea of like, oh, we don't talk about counseling. Like we don't tell people that we're getting help. But like there is so much freedom in sitting down with someone and just having someone to listen. And so I told them, I said, you have to get in counseling. You have to take care of yourself. If it's not for you, then do it for your kids and for your wife, for your husband. And so even my dad, he did counseling while he was on the job, and it changed everything. And so I was just getting to see that with these kids, what it looks like to be open and honest about where you're at.
If you really want to affect grown men, talk about their kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like that's powerful.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask, but you pretty much already covered it. You handled everything remarkably, like beyond remarkable in the first week, right? I mean, you became a staple of what we want people to do.
Yeah.
What did you do afterwards? What was your process as far as getting help? And I mean, it seems like it was very therapeutic for you to speak to everybody else and to tell them, hey, this is what you can do and these are the things. And that's part of what we're all doing here is trying to heal ourselves by talking with other people and sharing our experiences. But what did you do to cope with everything for the almost year now?
Yeah, so we were really thankful to already have a counseling service that we were familiar with in the area. And so my mom had already been seeing this counselor that we ended up just getting plugged in with. And so all of us go to counseling every week. we go once a week. My mom goes twice a week. And not only that, but we have just the best friend groups, small groups, church groups that we are super plugged in with. For a long time, I kept myself very busy. I worked at my church, and so we had started a new church. We were church planning, and so I got really involved with that. I was a youth intern, and so I was serving with students every week. And then it got to a point where it was like, okay, are we running from this, or are we being are we stewarding our time well? And so it got to a point where I knew it was becoming more of a distraction thing. And so I was just very self-aware of that. And so I decided to take a step back. But ultimately, it all comes down to, like, there's no agenda to this. And that freed us up a lot to know, like, you don't have to be on stage 3 of grief in November. You don't have to be 2 steps forward or 1 step behind. Like, it ultimately came down to people knowing us, loving us, and hearing us at the end of the day in all aspects of our lives, wherever we went. And but also just getting to live out this stuff in real life. I went to San Quentin and visited inmates there. I've gotten to be a part of different events. Just sharing my story. I've had one-on-one conversations. And so along the way, people don't realize, but that's actually really healing for us too.
She's a pro. She segues to everything.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Literally about to segue to that, and you took us right to it.
That being talking about San Quentin, and Rainey, would you kind of describe how y'all met and how y'all got involved with this program?
Mm-hmm. One of my best friends started a conference for teen girls. And it's called Therefore Teen Gathering, and it's once a year in Fort Worth. And part of the conference is having speakers come in. And prior to that, Chris had attended a weekend retreat called Dream Big, and it is conducted by a man named Bob Goff. And Bob Goff he actually was as an attorney and started out as an attorney, and then started doing work in conflict war countries like Somalia and Uganda, and started a nonprofit. And so in the nonprofit and in his work, he stepped away from practicing law, and now he is a speaker and writes and speaks. And so Chris went to one of his retreats because we really felt like, the Lord was calling us to help out officers as they were coming out. And so Chris was exploring that idea of how he could help out officers. And so it was just such a great, Bob is just such a motivational, idea, big brain person that encourages people. And so my friend Tiffany, I applied for her. She didn't know, for her to start coaching with Bob. And so all of that led to Bob does a class at San Quentin based on the Dream Big. He's created this, he calls it the Dream Big framework, and it's a curriculum. And he started going in through his nonprofit Love Does, and he actually teaches the inmates at San Quentin the same framework that he teaches civilians on the outside. And so he invited us to come with him. And by invited, I think we begged him if we could go with him, and we manipulated our way into, because we knew he was going. And it happened to be the same time that Shelby had also been invited to go.
Yeah, I want to give you a special thank you for bringing one of Bob's books in. It's Dream Big. I'm going to probably start that up this weekend. Okay. So Chris told me the story of the San Quentin visit, and I want to give a little bit of history lesson. I looked it up. It opened in 1852. It was called the Arena by the inmates. It's the oldest prison in California, and some of the historically toughest, most violent people have gone through that prison since its inception. Can y'all talk about that experience there when you got up and spoke, and how that went for you personally? Yeah.
So I was so excited to find my way at San Quentin with Bob. And I had no idea what that day was going to really look like. One, because I was going to be inside a prison with all of these violent, very crude men is what I thought. And I walked in and they're just walking around and we start having conversations with them. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is nothing like what they show on the news, on TV, on movies. It's nothing like that. And so I started forming some relationships with some of the guys there. They shared their story. And so finally, whenever we started this Dream Big class with them, we all sat down and here's a group of, 30, 40 of them.
At least, yeah.
And so Bob invited me up to share my story, and Bob did not tell me I was doing this, by the way.
He didn't tell any of us.
Yeah, he told none of us. And so anyway,
he didn't want people to not show up.
Right, yeah.
Right.
And so anyways, I got up there and I told them what happened on December 3rd, and I kind of just told them in the same words that I said to Jaime, but told them personally that, I call you by your name because it's what God calls you by. It's not a number. It's not a stamp of crime or violence or murder, whatever it is. But kind of extended the same forgiveness on behalf of humankind of like, you're able to move forward from this. You're able to know Jesus because of it. And so it was very wild. Like I still don't have the great words because it was just so unreal. Just getting up there and sharing my story and then seeing the response from these guys. We got to sit in small groups with them and got to hear some of their stories and allow them to dream. And but I think whenever you're sitting across someone who is convicted of the very murder that so could kill your dad like it did, like there's so much tension that could be there, but just allowing, it was totally God in that space, just allowing the freedom and the healing to happen like it did. So
did you get up like on a platform and give your story, and then you broke up into like kind of some small groups?
Yes.
Is that what it was like?
Yeah.
Well, about how many inmates were in there whenever?
Probably like
30,
40, something
and then we
like that.
broke up into groups of 10
Yeah.
each.
Yeah.
It was, I've been around incarcerated men for 25 years. This is what I do. And I think that...
And also she does it at work.
And also...
and she has to deal with you.
And also at work, I do that. And I've been into prisons and I've been into different places. And so I had an idea of what San Quentin was going to be like too. And I will say, again, a struggle in my faith has been, and I think everybody that works in law enforcement, Chris alluded to it, is that people become numbers and people become cases and they no longer become human. And I think after I left the DA's office, one of the things that, and really a lot of the work that Bob does and a lot of the, I've had kind of an unfolding of that, of going back to see people in the Imago Dei and the image of God. Yeah. And that was so played out that day. When we got, San Quentin is like, and I came back like a San Quentin evangelist because I'm like, it's like nothing I have ever seen before. It is like nothing I have ever seen before. And the warden and the associate warden, it is from the top down. They are both godly men who want the time for each of these men, whether they're going to be there for 8 months or the 7 life sentences, is to be productive and for them to be seen as human beings again. Yeah, for sure. And so we walk in.
And purpose. They find a purpose.
And they have people have no idea. They have all of these education systems set up. They have a newspaper that they run. Mark Zuckerberg has set up a computer where they are actually coding, like not just making little websites, like they are coding. And so it was one of the most impressive things that I saw of truly valuing human life, of coming back to, if we are going to incarcerate people, when they come out, we want them to be better.
Rehabilitation.
True rehabilitation. Yeah. And that's part of what Bob does and reminds. And it was, again, it's interesting because in my work, I know what everyone does when they come in the courtroom. I know what everyone has been accused of or what they've been found guilty of. And we had no idea what any of these guys had been charged with. We knew nothing about them. And they were beyond just like polite. They were truly inquisitive about us, like ask about, ask personal questions. And there's one sweet man, and you can tell, like, his life has been so changed because he cannot not tell you that he committed murder. Yeah. And like the other guys don't tell you, but it's like he's keeping a secret and he's lying to you. And so Reggie will pull you aside. I don't know if he did this to you. Like, he does it to everyone. He pulled me aside. He goes, I just need to tell you I murdered a man, and I murdered him in front of his family. And I will never live a day without feeling terrible about that. And you could just see he just has this kindness about him and this gentleness about him. And so it was the same with so many of the other guys. The executive director of Bob's nonprofit, her name is Jody Luke, and she is also amazing. And so we asked when we left, we're like, is it appropriate for us to contact the guys? Like, because we felt like we had such a connection and we had talked about so many things. So we have actually been writing back and forth with the guys. And one of the guys who is one of the leaders, he just recently, we've written back several times, and he just recently, I think he had to get to the point where he trusted me to tell me, he's like, you talked about your husband being a police officer. I'm doing this program inside San Quentin. He goes, what I haven't told you is I was a police officer. And I was arrested and charged while I was a police officer. And he went on to tell me about his offenses. So it was one of those things of like, we want to put people in categories. We are all one step away, from being exactly where those men are. We are all one bad experience away from being there. And so I think what San Quentin was for us was, for me for sure, is you cannot underestimate the power of hope. Right. And you have to leave room for redemption. Yes. And there is not a more powerful force out there than redemption. Right. And when you see it, and I will tell you, to watch these men, watch Shelby, tell them that they were forgiven and that they were made in the image of God. Here were these guys, tough guys. Several of them have multiple life sentences. They will never not be incarcerated, and they are just weeping. And several of the guys, and I told Shelby this, several of the guys have written, and they remembered when her court date was. They remembered when they were going to trial, and they had written me and said, would you please tell Shelby that we're praying for her? We know that court is going to be hard. We know this day is, dates are important to them. Yeah. Time is important to them. They know when their dates come up. So they specifically, took the time to write a letter and to say, please let Shelby know we're praying for her.
Wow, that's powerful, and that's inspiring. And whenever she was giving that message, Chris was telling me about just seeing the physical reaction from some of these guys, and some of these guys are in there for heinous crimes, and some are in there just for they're caught up in circumstances, and they're there, they're not getting out, and they're hearing from a young 18-year-old speak to them. I just can't imagine that scene. How long has that program at San Quentin been?
I think he's been doing about 2 years.
Oh, so it's fairly new.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. That part of the program. The other programs that they do, though, they've been doing, I think that's the outlier prison probably that I don't know how many more.
You don't hear about it.
No.
I mean, you really know.
And
it's pretty amazing, actually. She came home for days. That's all she wanted to talk about. I'm like, can we talk about anything but San Quentin? I got the newspapers. I'm reading the newspapers.
Shelby and I had a chance afterwards. The associate warden, his name is Oak Smith, his wife, they live on the property. So, San Quentin is kind of away from everything else. So people on staff live on property. And so his wife fixed lunch for us. And so we just sat and to listen to these men. And they said, because they have worked in the California Bureau of Prisons their whole career, and they've been in, doing this for decades, they said there is no other place like San Quentin. Yeah. And it all comes just from the mindset of, we treat human beings with dignity, and we look to see, what are we doing here? How can we work to rehabilitate and do what prisons were intended to do?
Right, right.
So I think this is a very difficult topic for a lot of police officers, because there's the heinous crime committed, the conviction, and it's so easy for us to just say, because there's a victim on almost all of those, almost every person in that prison, there's a actual victim to a crime.
There's a family.
There's a family. There's a family. And for us, I think it's very, very hard to even consider forgiveness, because we are the ones who are supposed to represent the victims of crime, right? We're supposed. So I think it's very hard for officers to separate the crime from the human, right? And you committed a heinous crime, and I think that to get to a point in life where you go, I can see that yes, there was a heinous crime. There is a victim, and I'm not lessening that by also looking at this defendant as he's also a human. He made a horrible decision. He did a horrible act, one or multiple, a lot of times. Because I will say that probably 10% of the people in the prison are really just evil, horrible people, right? They're just evil. Mm-hmm. But a majority of those people were in a bad situation, made bad decisions, were doing bad things, but it doesn't have to be who they are the rest of their life. Mm-hmm. People can be changed, and as a believer, I have to believe that. Mm-hmm. I have to know and for me to think any other way is actually wrong. Mm-hmm. And so to hear somebody who's truly been the victim, to have the strength to say, "No, I forgive you." Mm-hmm. You don't forgive the act, but you forgive the person. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's a very powerful message. And the important part of it is the freeing it gives. It allows for the growth and the grieving for you, for the victims, but for us being the kind of the third person, the third wheel in all of that too. It does finding that empathy to say, hey, I can separate the acts from the person, and I think it's very hard. And I think a lot of listeners are probably banging the dashboard every once in a while going, but I can't get past this. I can't get past that. Well, put yourself in Shelby's position and know what she just did and think, well, it can be done.
Yeah. And I would say too, like, what was really important for me to remind myself of is that this is not forever. And that these earthly things were not, like, this was never the way it was supposed to be. And to know that, to believe that, it starts from the very beginning of time back in Genesis, whenever you talk about Adam and Eve committing sin. Like, I know to the heart of God, his heart breaks whenever he sees stuff like this happen. And so I'm reminded that although this was never the way it was supposed to be, thank goodness that this is not forever. Yeah. And so just to simply, like, to put it in the most simple terms, fix your eyes on the things of heaven. Just even with your family, with your job, with your friends, your life, like, to not think of these people as, to know that the crimes that they committed are horrible. And, I can forgive the person, maybe not the act. I like the way that you put that. But to also know, like, there will be judgment. Yeah. And God will have the final say. He is the ultimate judge. And so just to rest in knowing, like, it's not up to us.
Not up to you. Right.
So that's just something that I've had to remind myself constantly.
It's impressive.
Mm-hmm.
Shelby, this new journey and this path that you're on, you're still so young, but mature well beyond your age. Okay, this is going to be a long journey for you. Mm-hmm. Where do you see yourself a decade from now in this new journey in your life? So
I am hoping to graduate next year, and like I said, I'm majoring in psychology with a kind of like a specialty in forensics, and so I have kind of tossed around a few ideas of what that's going to look like as far as a job, but I feel really called to ministry. And so right now I am working with our women's ministry at my church, but I'm also getting to travel and speak and do things like this. And so it's really fun for me, and I enjoy it. And I know that this story that God has weaved together and thrown me into, it's not just one for a year after it happened, 2 years after it happens. Like, I can so see myself a decade from now, like, still sharing the same story. I would love to get into more prisons and do ministry there. After leaving San Quentin, I just felt such a calling to those people. Maybe not San Quentin for the rest of my life, but just like getting into more prisons, getting to share my story. And, you know, I can't change what they did. They can't change what they did. But ultimately, my goal is to see these people in heaven one day, honestly. And if that takes me sharing a super hard story or walking through really terrible, heartbreaking grief, like, I'll do it. And even I think if you would have asked me, you know, Shelby, if you could go back and change anything, what would you change? Honestly, obviously, I would want my dad to be here. But I think, you know, if you asked my dad today, Richard, do you think it was worth it? Like, I think we would all say, like, yeah, Dad, it was worth it. So, I don't know. I'm excited. I don't know exactly what the future holds, but I'm just going to keep saying yes to the Lord, and wherever he takes me, I'll share this story a million times over and have all the hard conversations if it gets them to sitting beside Jesus one day. So
have you been were you contacted by any other survivors from other incidents about, you know, what to expect, what it looks like? Did you have a lot of those conversations with people reaching out to you?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. I had quite a few reach out to me and say, you know, my dad was killed in the line of duty. My husband was killed in the line of duty. And really just asking, like, how do you do it? What do I do? And it seems like a really complex situation. Like, it almost seems like there needs to be all these ducks in order, and you have to do this, but don't do that. And honestly, like, I think we just make things so difficult sometimes. And it's like, it's really not that difficult. It's just to choose God and to love others. And that's kind of just been what I've ran with. Like, tell the story, you know, tell the hard story, because we can do hard things. So.
Well, and I think, you know, everybody handles it, like you said earlier, with your siblings. Y'all have a different way of dealing with it.
Right.
I think that where you are, that clearly God's got a plan for you. I can tell you, as a dad and as a police officer, I can only imagine how proud your father would be of what you're doing right now. I could only dream that my children could do the same thing that you're doing, living out their faith in light of a tragedy. And so your spiritual maturity, your just general maturity, and your ability to forgive. It's such a testament to how you've been raised by your mom and by your dad, the legacy that your dad left and that your mom helped form, and here you are. It goes even beyond. I guarantee you, of all the accolades your dad got in 21 years of police work, what you're doing now would make him the most proud.
Thank you.
No doubt about it. And so, you know, I've said this a lot of times. I was very reluctant to tell my story with Joe because I was calling it my story about certain things, and it's really not my story. It's God's story of how he worked in me. And so it's almost not fair to sit on that.
Right.
And so once you, and then I will tell you what will end up happening is there will be a response to you. Mm-hmm. That'll probably come to Joe, but there will be a response to you, some that will be heard, some that will not. But your story and how you're walking through this, will strengthen people who have dealt with something, or it will lay the pathway for how they will deal with it.
Yeah.
And so the fact that you're willing to come and share God's story as He's worked through you in this incident, like you said, you might be doing this for the next 30 years, and well worth every bit of it,
Right,
because you will change people without even knowing it. They'll hear this and they'll look at things differently. So I want to say thank you for coming and not sitting on your story, but sharing it.
Thank you.
It's an incredible story. I really think this is a perfect way to wrap it up. I want to thank Chris. You're super busy. Kent, thank you for coming out here. Rainey, you're on it. Your schedule is completely stacked, I'm sure. But you, Shelby, you're the beautiful side of humanity.
Thank you.
You mentioned earlier when you got the news and you got to your house, you got out of the car and you said that you fell because you were so weak.
Yeah.
And I don't ever want to hear you say you were weak again. You're remarkably strong. I mean, it is amazing. Thank you for sharing the stories about your dad too. That I know it's therapeutic for you, but it's great for us to hear it also. And if you don't continue with public speaking in some sort of fashion, then that's going to be a huge tragedy. You are amazing. Like
Thank you.
I'm a huge fan.
Thank you.
And the world needs more people like you. Thank you for coming today.
Of course.
Thank you, Shelby. Richard Houston, End of Watch, December 3rd, 2021.
Hey brother, hey sister, I'll never give up on you. Hey Mrs., hey mister, I'll see this all the way through. No matter how far the sun and the moon, I'll never give up on you. Down when you're lonely, I'll pull you up. Life leaves you heavy when the going gets tough. I'll be your shoulder, together we'll run. Up from the bottom, yeah, we'll rise above. Hey brother, hey sister, I'll never give up on you. Hey Mrs., hey mister, I'll see this all the way through. No matter how far the sun and the moon, I'll never give up on you. I'll never give up on you. Hey brother, hey sister, I'll never give up on you. Hey Mrs., hey mister, I'll see this all the way through. No matter how far, for the gold and the blue, I'll never give up